Welcome to Eden Notes, where we study the Bible verse by verse. We've covered Exodus chapters 1 through 10 in our previous videos, so be sure to check those out. In this video, we're diving into Exodus 11 through 20, from the final plague to the covenant at Sinai. Moses stood before Pharaoh one final time. Egypt had been shattered by plague after plague, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hard. The land was broken, the people exhausted, and still the king refused to let Israel go. Then the Lord spoke again, declaring that one last judgment would fall upon Egypt, a judgment unlike any before it. At midnight, every firstborn in the land would die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the lowest servant, even the firstborn of the animals. None would be spared. A great cry would rise throughout Egypt, louder than any sorrow the nation had ever known or would ever know again. But among the Israelites, not even a dog would bark. The distinction between Egypt and Israel would be undeniable. Moses left Pharaoh in burning anger, knowing this would be the final confrontation. The Lord had already told Moses that Pharaoh would eventually drive the Israelites out completely, urging them to leave at once. God instructed the Israelites to ask their Egyptian neighbors for silver, gold, and clothing. The Egyptians, terrified and eager to see them go, gave freely. The people who once lived as slaves now walked in favor. The Lord then gave specific instructions to Moses and Aaron for a sacred night that would be remembered forever. Each household was to take a lamb, 1 year old, without defect. If a family was too small, they were to share with neighbors so that none would be wasted. The lamb was to be slaughtered at twilight. Its blood was to be taken and spread on the doorposts and the lintel of each house. The meat was to be roasted over fire and eaten that same night, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. They were told to eat in haste, dressed, sandals on their feet, staffs in hand, ready to leave at a moment's notice. This meal would be known as the Lord's Passover. On that night, God would pass through Egypt, striking down every firstborn. But when he saw the blood on the doorframes, he would pass over that house, and no destruction would enter. The Lord declared that this day would become a lasting memorial. Every year, the Israelites were to remember how God delivered them from bondage. For 7 days they were to eat bread without yeast, removing all leaven from their homes. Anyone who disobeyed would be cut off from the community. This was to be a permanent ordinance, passed down through generations. Moses called the elders of Israel and delivered the instructions exactly as God had spoken them. The people bowed and worshipped, aware that the night ahead would change everything. At midnight, the judgment came. The Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. Pharaoh's son died. The sons of prisoners died. The firstborn of livestock died. There was no home without loss. A piercing cry rose across the land as grief swept through Egypt like a wave. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the darkness of the night. His resistance was gone. His voice was broken. He told them to leave immediately, men, women, children, and livestock. He urged them to go and worship their God as they had asked and begged them to bless him as well. The Egyptians pressed the Israelites to leave quickly, fearing that death would soon claim them all. The people gathered their belongings in haste. Their dough had no time to rise, so they carried it wrapped in cloths on their shoulders. They left with silver, gold, and clothing, just as the Lord had promised. After 430 years, Israel walked out of Egypt. The Israelites numbered about 600,000 men, not counting women and children. Many others joined them as well, along with vast herds of livestock. It was a night of watching, kept by the Lord to bring them out of Egypt, and it would forever be remembered as sacred. The Lord commanded that the Passover be kept with care. No foreigner was to eat it unless circumcised. No bone of the lamb was to be broken. It was to be eaten within one house. The same law applied to both native-born Israelites and those who joined themselves to Israel. That very day, the Lord brought the people out of Egypt by their divisions. Afterward, God spoke again, giving instructions about the firstborn. Every firstborn male, both human and animal, was to be set apart for the Lord. This act would serve as a reminder that God spared Israel's firstborn when he struck Egypt. When future generations asked why this practice mattered, parents were to tell the story of how the Lord brought them out of slavery with a mighty hand. The Lord did not lead the people by the shortest route through Philistine territory. knowing that war might cause them to turn back. Instead, he led them through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. The Israelites marched out in orderly ranks. Moses carried with him the bones of Joseph, honoring the oath Joseph had made generations earlier, that his remains would be carried out when God delivered his people. The Lord went before them, visible and unmistakable. By day, he appeared as a pillar of cloud, guiding their path. By night, he appeared as a pillar of fire, giving them light. The cloud never left its place ahead of them. They could travel day or night, led by the presence of God himself. After the Israelites left Egypt, the Lord spoke again, directing them to turn back and camp near the sea, between the wilderness and the waters. From a human point of view, the location looked dangerous. Mountains hemmed them in. The desert stretched behind them. The sea blocked their way forward. Pharaoh soon received word that the Israelites were wandering and appeared trapped. His grief turned into rage. He questioned his own decision and accused himself and his officials of foolishness for letting their slaves go. His heart hardened once more. He ordered his army to prepare for pursuit. Pharaoh gathered 600 of the finest chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, each with trained officers. The full power of Egypt's military surged forward. Horses thundered across the land as the army closed in on the Israelites, overtaking them near the sea. When the Israelites saw the Egyptians approaching, fear seized them. Panic spread through the camp. They cried out and turned on Moses, accusing him of bringing them into the wilderness to die. They said it would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to perish in the desert. The sound of terror filled the air as the people imagined the army crushing them between the sea and the sand. Moses stood firm before them. He told the people not to be afraid. He urged them to stand still and watch the salvation the Lord would bring. He assured them that the Egyptians they saw that day would never be seen again. The Lord would fight for them. They were to remain calm and trust. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, commanding him to lift his staff and stretch out his hand over the sea. The pillar of cloud that had gone before the Israelites moved behind them, placing itself between the camp of Israel and the camp of Egypt. Darkness fell on the Egyptian side, while light remained with Israel. All night long, the two camps stood separated, unable to come near one another. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord sent a powerful east wind that blew all night. The waters split and were driven back, forming a path of dry ground through the sea. Walls of water stood on the right and on the left. The Israelites moved forward, stepping into the seabed, walking through the sea as if on solid ground. The Egyptians pursued them. Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and soldiers rushed in after the Israelites, charging into the divided waters. As the night gave way to morning, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to lock, making them difficult to drive. The Egyptians realized too late that the Lord was fighting for Israel. Fear gripped them, and they attempted to flee. Then the Lord spoke to Moses again, telling him to stretch out his hand over the sea. Moses obeyed. As the sun rose, the waters rushed back into place. The sea closed over the chariots and horsemen, the entire army that had pursued Israel. Not one of them survived. On the far shore, the Israelites stood in awe. They saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up along the shore. The power that once terrorized them was gone. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hand of Egypt. The people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. Then a song rose from the people. Moses and the Israelites lifted their voices together, singing praise to the Lord. They sang of his triumph and strength, declaring that he had thrown horse and rider into the sea. They proclaimed him as their salvation, their warrior, their God. They sang of how the waters piled up at his command, how the enemy was shattered by his breath, how the Lord reigned forever and ever. Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand. All the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. She sang back to the people, calling them to sing to the Lord for his glorious victory. After the celebration, the Israelites journeyed into the wilderness. For 3 days they traveled without finding water. When they finally came to water, it was bitter and undrinkable. The people complained again, grumbling against Moses and asking what they were supposed to drink. Moses cried out to the Lord. The Lord showed him a piece of wood. When Moses threw it into the water became sweet. There, the Lord gave the people a statute and a command, testing them. He told them that if they listened carefully, obeyed his commands, and followed his ways, he would not bring upon them the diseases of Egypt. He revealed himself as the Lord who heals. They moved on and came to Elim, a place with 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. There, they camped and rested by the water. The story does not end with the sea closing behind them. It continues forward into the wilderness, where trust would be tested, faith would be shaped, and a nation would learn what it meant to follow a God who saves, leads, and fights for his people. After crossing the sea and celebrating deliverance, the Israelites moved deeper into the wilderness. Not long after their song of victory faded, their joy turned into anxiety. Food ran out. Hunger set in. The people gathered against Moses and Aaron and began to complain. They said it would have been better to die in Egypt, where they sat by pots of meat and ate their fill, than to be brought into the wilderness to starve. The Lord heard their complaints and spoke to Moses. He said he would rain bread from heaven for the people. Each day they were to go out and gather only enough for that day. In this way, God would test whether they would follow his instructions. On the 6th day, they were to gather twice as much, because the 7th day would be a day of rest. Moses told the people that in the evening they would know it was the Lord who brought them out of Egypt, and in the morning they would see his glory. Their complaints were not truly against Moses and Aaron, but against the Lord himself. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. In the morning, when the dew lifted, there was a fine, flaky substance on the ground, as delicate as frost. The people looked at it and asked one another what it was, because they had never seen anything like it. Moses told them it was the bread the Lord had given them to eat. Each person gathered as much as they needed. Those who gathered much had nothing left over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. Moses instructed them not to keep any of it until morning. Some did not listen and kept part of it overnight. By morning it was full of worms and smelled rotten, and Moses was angry with them. Every day they gathered the bread in the morning. When the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, the people gathered twice as much food. When the leaders reported this to Moses, he explained that the next day was a sacred rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. They were to bake and boil what they needed and keep the rest for the next day. This time, the food did not spoil. On the 7th day, some people still went out to gather, but they found nothing. The Lord rebuked them for refusing to follow his commands and reminded them that the Sabbath was a gift. For 6 days they would gather food, but the 7th day was a day of rest. The people called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses instructed them to keep a jar of manna as a testimony for future generations, so they would see the bread the Lord fed them in the wilderness. Aaron placed it before the Lord to be preserved. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years, until they came to the border of the land where they would settle. From there, the Israelites moved on according to the Lord's command and camped at a place where there was no water. Once again, the people complained and quarreled with Moses, demanding water to drink. Moses asked why they were testing the Lord. The people accused him of bringing them out of Egypt to die of thirst along with their children and livestock. Moses cried out to the Lord, fearing the people were close to stoning him. The Lord instructed Moses to take his staff, the same one he used to strike the Nile, and go ahead of the people. The elders of Israel were to go with him. God told Moses he would stand before him on a rock at Horeb. Moses was to strike the rock, and water would come out for the people to drink. Moses did exactly as he was told. Water flowed from the rock, and the people drank. The place was named Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Soon after, the Amalekites came and attacked Israel. Moses instructed Joshua to choose men and go out to fight, while Moses stood on the hill with the staff of God in his hands. As long as Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. Whenever he lowered them, Amalek gained the advantage. Moses' hands grew tired. Aaron and Hur placed a stone under him so he could sit, and they held up his hands, one on each side, until sunset. With Moses' hands steady, Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his army. After the victory, the Lord told Moses to write this event on a scroll as a memorial and to make sure Joshua heard it, because God would one day completely blot out the memory of Amalek. Moses built an altar and named it "The Lord is my banner." Later, Moses was reunited with his father-in-law Jethro, who came bringing Moses' wife Zipporah and their 2 sons. Jethro rejoiced at all the good the Lord had done for Israel, especially how he delivered them from Egypt. He praised the Lord, declaring that now he knew the Lord was greater than all other gods. The next day, Jethro observed Moses sitting from morning until evening, judging disputes among the people. Moses explained that the people came to him to seek God's will and to learn his laws. Jethro warned him that this system would exhaust both Moses and the people. He advised Moses to teach the people God's commands and appoint capable, trustworthy men to serve as leaders over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. These leaders would handle ordinary matters, while Moses would deal only with the most difficult cases. Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed it. He appointed leaders throughout Israel, easing the burden of leadership. Afterward, Jethro returned to his own land. After the Israelites left Egypt and journeyed through the wilderness, they arrived at the foot of a mountain. They camped there, spread out below its slopes. Moses went up the mountain to meet God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. God told Moses to speak to the people and remind them of what he had done, how he carried them on eagle's wings and brought them to himself. He declared that if they obeyed his voice and kept his covenant, they would be his treasured possession among all peoples. The whole earth belonged to him, but Israel would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Moses returned and called the elders of the people together. He told them everything the Lord had spoken. The people answered with one voice, saying they would do everything the Lord had said. Moses carried their words back to God. The Lord told Moses that he would come to the people in a dense cloud so they would hear him speak and trust Moses forever. God instructed Moses to consecrate the people. They were to wash their garments and be ready by the 3rd day. Boundaries were to be set around the mountain, and no one was allowed to touch it. Anyone who touched the mountain would be put to death. Not a hand was to be laid on them. They were to be stoned or shot with arrows. Whether human or animal, none could cross the boundary. Only when the trumpet sounded a long blast were the people allowed to approach the mountain. Moses went down from the mountain and consecrated the people. They washed their garments and prepared themselves. Moses warned them to be ready and to keep themselves set apart. On the morning of the 3rd day, thunder roared and lightning flashed. A thick cloud covered the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast sounded. All the people in the camp trembled. Moses led them out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke rose like smoke from a furnace, and the entire mountain shook violently. The sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. The Lord descended to the top of the mountain and called Moses up. Moses went up. The Lord warned him to go back down and warned the people not to break through to see him, or many of them would perish. Even the priests who approached the Lord had to consecrate themselves, or the Lord would break out against them. Moses replied that the people could not come up because boundaries had already been set. Still, the Lord insisted that Moses go down and bring Aaron up with him, but no one else was to cross the boundary. Then God spoke all these words. He declared that he was the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He commanded that they have no other gods before him. They were not to make images of anything in heaven above, on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. They were not to bow down to them or worship them, for the Lord is a jealous God, visiting the consequences of sin to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate him, but showing steadfast love to thousands of generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. He commanded that they not misuse the name of the Lord their God, for the Lord would not hold anyone guiltless who misused his name. He commanded them to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days they were to labor and do all their work, but the 7th day was a Sabbath to the Lord. On that day, no work was to be done, neither by them, their sons or daughters, servants, nor animals, nor foreigners living among them. The reason given was that in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. He commanded them to honor their father and mother so that their days would be long in the land the Lord was giving them. He commanded them not to murder. He commanded them not to commit adultery. He commanded them not to steal. He commanded them not to give false testimony against their neighbor. He commanded them not to covet their neighbor's house, wife, servants, animals, or anything that belonged to their neighbor. When the people saw the thunder and lightning, heard the trumpet, and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled and stood at a distance. They told Moses to speak to them himself, and they would listen, but asked that God not speak directly to them, or they would die. Moses told the people not to be afraid. He explained that God had come to test them so that the fear of God would be before them, keeping them from sin. The people remained at a distance, while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. The Lord spoke again, reminding Moses to tell the people that they had seen him speak from heaven. They were not to make gods of silver or gold to rival him. They were to make an altar of earth and sacrifice offerings on it in places where God caused his name to be remembered. If they made an altar of stone, it was not to be built with tools, because using tools would profane it. They were not to go up to the altar by steps, so that their nakedness would not be exposed. If this study helped you understand Scripture more clearly, like and subscribe to Eden Notes. We're walking through the Bible verse by verse, uncovering God's story one chapter at a time. Join us for the next part of Exodus and continue the journey.